Hi, everybody. Welcome to another JetBrains webinar. I'm really excited about today's guest. He is one of the prettiest guests we've had. That's an inside joke, by the way, but I'm really happy to have him here today and to talk about the topic he'll be talking about, which is building payment workflows with Stripe and Azure. So without further ado, let's welcome Cecil.
Oh my goodness. Hi everybody. Thank you so much, man. It's it's always so much of a pleasure for me to join these JetBrains webinars. I'm a big fan of the products and the folks that work here. So I definitely appreciate everyone making the time to hang out with me today. And what I want to talk about is how we can build payment workflows using Stripe, using Azure, and some other really cool and interesting tools that we'll kind of see along the way. Really what I wanted to do with this particular session and with the demos that I'm going to show you is I wanted to go a little bit above and beyond the hello world samples, the to-do application samples, like those types of things, but also didn't want to create anything that was too complex. Mm-hmm. So what I try to do is put together like a really like a sample I think people will be able to relate to. And then through it, what we will do is, I'll burn through a couple of slides and then we'll spend a lot of time having conversations about code. Okay. So I might go a little fast because there's a lot of stuff in there when we actually get into the code. If I'm going too fast, let me know. If there's anything that you want me to pause and repeat and iterate on, just let me know. And also if there's anything that I say that is wrong, I'm not above being told that I'm wrong. I'm totally fine with that. I'm always open, to learn new stuff. So definitely feel free to correct me. I have no problem being told that I can be correct.
Yeah,
but that's it.
Well, Cecil, I do want to pause for a second because I just want to do the obligatory kind of like housekeeping stuff, and then I'll give you the stage, and you can definitely like give the presentation, and I'll take care of YouTube chat. But let me do some housekeeping first, and then we'll get started. Is that okay?
Well, while you do the housekeeping, I'm going to try and get even prettier, and then we'll figure it out.
Perfect. Let's go. Folks are already in the YouTube chat, but if you're watching this live right now on YouTube or even Twitch, feel free to leave any questions that you have for Cecil as we kind of go through the presentation. We'll probably take a few pauses here and there so we can answer your questions. If you have any comments, anything like that, please leave it in the YouTube chat. Cecil jokingly already asked this question, but I'll answer it for him and everyone watching right now. Yes, this session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube after this webinar is done being live. So on that note, I'll pass it back to you and I'll keep an eye on the YouTube chat. So stage is yours.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, what we're going to do today is, we're going to talk about how we can build, workflows using Stripe and Azure and a bunch of other really cool things. I've been in the .NET space a long time, and so I've done a couple of things, and I've seen a couple of different types of industries. And for some reason, I feel like payments for folks is still a very scary thing to deal with. It's something that they're very much like, oh, I don't want to be the payments person because like I don't want to be responsible for messing up people's money. Like those are types of errors that can be very detrimental to the business. So what I want to show you is like some of the ways that you could think about adding payments to your application, but then also too, well, what else happens after you get paid, right? Like you usually have some type of fulfillment workflow. You'll usually have some type of maybe like a refund workflow, right? Like you usually have some type of business process that is attached to those types of things. And we want to talk about some of that, some of the architecture of how that stuff looks like, some of the code that kind of goes together to make that happen, and even some of the different other services that we could use that will make that a little bit easier for you. So that's kind of what we want to do. So really quick, for folks that don't know me, again, I'm Cecil. I'm a developer advocate, been an advocate for a long time. Originally from the Caribbean, born and raised in Antigua. Now I live in Florida. Like throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different industries. At one point in time, I used to write stock trading software. That was really cool. Another point in time, I used to work on taxes. Taxes aren't the most fun thing in the world, but it's good work. But I bring it up to say, like, I've spent a lot of time working on systems that I've actually seen move money around, right? Like again, whether it's we're talking about stocks and stock trading, or we're talking about working on taxes for like HR systems and things of that nature, right? And again, moving money around, regardless of the domain and the context, is usually fairly intimidating for a lot of developers. And so again, what I want to do is again spend a little bit of time and start talking about, well, what are some of the workflows that we can put in place to make that concept a little bit easier for folks to deal with, and then what are some of these services that we can kind of put together to make that happen. And so the first thing I want to do is start talking about what exactly is a workflow. And this is my personal definition, right? Like a workflow is a process made up of a collection of distinct tasks, right? They're things that are executed in a particular type of sequence to do whatever it is that you want to do. But I think even on a higher level than that, like workflows, like I said before, like have a particular type of context. So we could talk about like, what's your business workflow? What are the things that you need to do to run your business? You know, us as developers, we often talk about your developer workflow, right? Like, what are the steps that you need to do to make your job, and how can we make those things easier? Another thing that I often think about is workflows from the perspective of your user, right? And when you think about like your user workflow, you're usually thinking about like user experience. Like if you have an app, a website or mobile app or whatever the case is, and you want your user to do something, what are the steps that need to happen for that user to accomplish that task? And usually what we're trying to do is optimize that workflow so that we can accomplish the task without taking too many steps, right? That's usually what we do when we think about those types of things. Now, it's 2023, and as a good developer, I'm going to do what every other good developer does. I'm going to ask ChatGPT what it thinks a workflow is. And so I went ahead and I asked ChatGPT for like a really spicy definition of what it thought workflows were. And so you can see it says workflows, particularly business workflows, is the choreography of tasks that transfers ideas into actions and actions into results. And I can't agree with that too, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. And particularly for folks that might be in the distributed systems space, that word choreography is actually pretty important, right? Because it is one of those patterns that we use when we talk about like moving tasks from one place to the other, right? When we talk about like the different steps in the workflow, how do I go from one step to the other? How do I know like the path I need to take? How do I know what's the itinerary, right? You'll often hear that word sometimes when people talk about choreography from a programming perspective. What is the itinerary of that message that's flowing over the wire? Another thing you'll hear people talk about is orchestration, right? Orchestration usually involves like some type of centralized thing, the orchestrator, right? Some type of centralized control mechanism that now it's coordinating the steps and it's controlling the itinerary and, you know, the different workflows and the places that follow up after, you know, different successful or unsuccessful results, right? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Now, let's talk about payment workflows, right? We're going to talk about a couple of different ones, but let's start at the top, right? Like you can imagine I have a business, and whatever your business is, maybe I'm selling tickets, maybe you're selling retail products, you know, maybe a supermarket, or maybe even a site that just takes donations, right? Like whatever it is that you're doing, I'm accepting money. So if you stop for a minute and you try and imagine what are some of the things that happen or have to happen on your side for there to be a successful transaction upfront from your customer and then a successful fulfillment in the back, right? So you have to think about, well, which products are involved, as an example. You might think about what countries am I selling these things in? What type of payments am I going to accept? Am I going to take credit card? Am I going to take, am I going to take cash maybe? Like, am I going to do in-person payments, online payments? You know, what are the services that I'm using on the back end? How can I test my workflows? What SDKs am I using? How do I document it, right? Like all these different things that we think about as we try and consider what are exactly these workflows, right? What are these steps that we have to take to actually get to our desired outcome? Now, specifically when it comes to payments, here's some of the things that I like to consider. So over the time, we've seen that like payments have actually evolved over time, right? So obviously we started with cash, and then credit cards, particularly in the United States, became a very popular way. But then we've also seen the growth in other types of payments as well, right? You see people using things like Apple Pay and Google Pay and Samsung Pay. I actually don't know anyone that uses Samsung Pay, but there's Apple Pay and there's Google Pay. There's a couple other things, right? Amazon has a pay service too, right? But then In addition to that, now we've also seen the advent of other types of services, right? Like we've seen the buy now, pay later services. We think about Klarna, we think about Afterpay. Have you ever heard about some of those types of things? Right? The fact of the matter is there's more than one way that people can accept money or people can give you money. So if you think about that, well, how exactly is your business going to be able to deal with customers as, again, like what's my workflow? Like what is the thing that I'm going to be able to allow my customers to do? And so now when we kind of look at the statistics, I think this slide is about a year old, so the numbers might be like slightly off, so don't, fact check me. But when you think about it, credit cards only drive 40% of commerce worldwide. I'm not talking about just the United States. I'm not just talking about the UK or Europe. I'm talking about worldwide, right? Only 40% of commerce. So again, as you're thinking about your workflow, as you're thinking about what are the things that your business is going to accept, you got to think about, hey, if I'm only accepting credit cards, if I'm an online business, I'm only being able to access 40% of the global workplace. I'm pretty sure you're going to say you probably want to dip into that other 60% too, right? Like you don't want to leave that other part of the market untapped and unaccounted for, right? So these are some of the important things that you probably want to think about. Also, another thing you might want to consider when it comes to your workflow, when it comes to the steps that you're going to take for that user's experience, right? Well, how do I ship it? Am I sending emails? Is it a digital product? Is it a physical product? How do I get it to their house? How do I figure out, well, what is the logistical, nuances that I have to consider to go from point A to point B, right? Again, there's a user experience up front, but then there's also the back-end workflow. So there's a lot of different workflows that kind of go into trying to, craft, what exactly it is that your business is trying to do. So again, when you think about integrating with any type of payment processor, right, this is kind of the general flow of what the world looks like. So you have a customer goes to their browser, sees some stuff, hey, this is cool, I want to buy it, or they want to buy it, right? They add it to their shopping cart, they submit their order, goes to the server, hits the payment processor, right? And again, this could be whoever payment processor you choose to use, and now they're going to try and receive payment. And that can happen in a number of different ways, right? So it could be an immediate payment. We talk about immediate payment types, like things like credit cards. When you swipe a credit card, you pretty much get a result back almost instantaneously. But they have other payment methods that are, deferred payment methods, which means that, for some countries, I submit this payment, but now I have to go and confirm it with my bank. I have, I get like some type of token and I have to go to a place to be like, hey, I want to pay for this. And so those are called deferred payment methods. What happens now is that in the back, your payment process is going to wait until you've actually confirmed it, until you've physically gone to wherever you need to go to say, hey, yes, I did the thing. I want to get my stuff. I'm going to confirm this and I'm going to acknowledge that this is something I want to do. So what happens now at the back of that is that whenever those payment methods are finalized, now you're going to get a response back over to your customer, right? Now, again, let's think about it. If I'm using credit cards up front and I'm saying, okay, great, I'm going to use this credit card, I'm going to pay, I'm going to hit the back end, I'm going to come right back. Your user experience is usually pretty snappy, right? Like that means that I could get paid and I could just send the user back pretty quickly, right? I have accepted the payment. But what happens if you're using a deferred payment method, right? What happens if you're using, some of that 60%, right? Some of those other things that other folks are using. Your user experience, right? Your user's flow into your system should be, okay, well, I'm going to sit down here and I'm going to leave my browser open. I'm going to leave my mobile app open and I'm going to wait for a day or two or whatever it takes for me to confirm the payment and come back. That is not a good user experience. That is not a good user workflow, right? And that's not the way that we want to have customers, because you can imagine your customers are probably going to be like, this is not a good experience for me. I don't want to do this. Let me figure something else out, right? So again, let's think about like some of the ways that we can do this. And when we get into the demo, I'll go a little bit deeper and I'll explain how exactly some of this stuff works. Another thing that you want to think about as you're talking about workflows and you're thinking about, well, so what are some of the things that you need to make sure are in place for you to be able to do the things that you need to do? Again, when you think about being able to accept credit cards specifically, if folks have never heard about PCI Compliance, PCI stands for the payment card industry. And they have a governing board, which is made up of a bunch of different credit card companies, which has which pretty much kind of get together and they talk about, well, what are the credit card security standards that we want to implement across the board, so that we want to make sure that customers and companies are very much protected as they're transmitting, card information back and forth. And so they've implemented this thing called PCI DSS, right? PCI Data Security Standard. So usually when people say, hey, are you PCI compliant? They usually mean, hey, well, have you implemented like the data security standard? And inside of the standard, it covers various things like, again, how do I transfer how do I protect the transfer of credit card information? How do I protect the actual storage of that credit card information? And then also too, it includes like, I think it's yearly audits, where someone comes here, your place of business, and they check and see, well, are you implementing the right patterns and practices, and are you up to code, right? Are you up to compliance when you're storing this information? Now, I'll be very honest with you. I've gone to a couple of websites. I'm not saying any of you have built them, but I've gone to a couple of websites and I've seen some very, sketchy things, right? And so, I'm not a snitch. I'm not going to go report anybody. But you as a customer, you should be very concerned about, again, are the places that you're going to really, are they safe? Are they PCI compliant? Are they really taking care of your data, right? Because that's something that you want to be concerned about. Credit card fraud is a serious thing. You as a developer and you as a person that maybe even owns a company, you want to make sure that you're protecting your customers from some of these different types of things. Okay. I'm going to talk about Stripe. I work at Stripe. Stripe is a payment processor. We're able to process payments around a bunch of different companies. But specifically, what I want to show you today is one of the options that we have is called, Stripe Checkout. And it helps you a lot with your PCI compliance because, essentially like you're going to rely on us to kind of do a lot of that checking and the storage and the transfer of credit card information for you. So you don't have to really worry about it so much. We create like this hosted form and it has all of the particular different types of details that you can need to kind of put your app together. So what I'm going to do now is first I'm going to pause for a second. Let me know if you folks have any questions, anything anyone has to ask or say. And if not, what I want to do is actually want to run a demo and show you a little bit about what's happening here.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation happening, and we're just talking about the payment systems from each of the individuals in chat and where they're from. There are folks from Nigeria, Germany, Belgium. So like some of these I don't think I've heard of, but like Ideal in Belgium, Klarna, I guess in Germany. So like these are interesting. So, but no particular questions, just kind of that kind of conversation. So I'll send it back to you.
Okay, great. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to run this demo, but of course the demo is running in the wrong browser. And so this demo that I'm showing you right now, for folks that may have seen me on this JetBrains stream before, so this is one of the demos that I've shown previously on here, but it's a little bit different today. And what we're going to really focus on is like the back end of it. But what I want to do is upfront show you what that user experience looks like, so you can see like what are some of the things that we think about, again, as we're thinking about how does the user flow through our website. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to log out first. And just for context, so this application is built using Blazor WASM. So Blazor in the front end, it's hosted in an ASP.NET Core application in the back end, .NET 7.0. And I'm also using Identity Server, right, for my identity management. Now, some people might ask, well, why am I using Identity Server? Why do I not use ASP.NET Core Identity? Why? Because I'm lazy. I am not a person that wants to I don't want to deal with identity. I don't. And so I rather pass it off to someone else. I rather pass that off to Auth0, to Okta, to someone else and have them deal with it. But again, as we think about our workflows, making those types of decisions come with certain actions. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, right? So here's my application. I have a couple of event listings. This is just a bunch of, this is just some static data of events that are happening around the world. Now I can have my details page. I can come in, I can decide to log in if I want to purchase things. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here, something as simple as like log in to purchase. So you can assume that I am not allowing guest users. I'm requiring people to have an account because I want to know who they are up front before I start issuing tickets and stuff like that to them. Now, you may not want to do that. And that's totally fine. But I just chose to do it that way. And so what I have now is, inside of my application, I pretty much have like a security context in my Blazor app to say, if this person's not logged in, show them the login button. Right, so I'm gonna hit login. Now notice it's sent me over to identity server. And again, I'll show you what the code looks like in a minute, but I really just wanna walk through the demo first. Now it sent me over to identity server. Now using identity server, I'm actually using this thing called backend for frontend. I went and looked through the docs and kind of set it up. And I think it's a really good way if folks are building apps that are, Blazor front ends, JavaScript front ends, but still you want to be able to not only auth with your application, but you also want to auth with like third-party APIs that you might want to call that require OAuth and stuff like that. And so for me, this was just a good way to do it. Because again, I'm a lazy developer and I want someone else to deal with it. So I'm going to log in. But before I log in, I want to show you this register page. Now, this register page is technically like a custom page that I created, and I extended identity server a little bit to be able to enable some of this feature functionality. But now inside of this register page, I want you to see this little checkbox that's at the bottom, right? Like that is create Stripe customer. That's there for the demo. That's not something I think that you should put in your applications. It's just there for the demo, but it's there because I want to make a call out, right? When you have a payment processor, whether it's Stripe or anyone else, inside of that processor, there's always the concept of customers, there's a concept of products, there's a concept of prices at the minimum, right? And I'm sure in your app, in your business or whatever the case is, you probably have the concept of customers and products and prices as well. So now, how do I sync those two together, right? Like, how do I get the thing that's in my payment processor synced with the thing that's inside of my personal database, right? Which one is the source of truth? Right? Which one is the most up-to-date customer? Where does my inventory live? What is my accurate customer information live? Right? All of these types of things are some things that you have to think about. Now, throughout the ecosystem, I've seen folks do things like, I've seen folks do things like, have syncing services that do that type of stuff. I had a conversation with some folks from Auth0. Auth0, they have a really cool thing called Auth0 functions or Auth0 actions. Can't remember the name, but something of the sort. And what it will allow you to do is, you can run callbacks that will allow you to run arbitrary code, relatively arbitrary code after the fact that your user is created. What I've done in this case is that after my user has been created in this database, right, inside of identity server, I'm forking out to a worker service in the background, because again, I don't want this to be something that's holding up my user experience. I'm forking out to a user service in the background that's going to go ahead and create that Stripe customer for me. And then it's just going to associate that customer with my user that's in this application. So what does that mean? That means I have an entry in my personal database for who my user is. But then also, if I head over to Stripe, I also have an entry for that person as well. Right? So you can see here, I just logged in. I don't have a profile page. I don't have that information to show you like that. But then if I head over to Stripe, this is my Stripe dashboard, and I can hit customers. I have this customer that I just logged into, right? Like this is me, and I'm inside of this app in this database. And if I wanted to create another one, I could. Okay. Now you can notice if I head back over here, notice now it doesn't say, log in purchase. I can just hit tickets. Now I want you to time me for a second. I want you to tell me how long this takes. I want to buy this. I see the thing. I click pay, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm done. Right? That's a relatively quick checkout experience, right? Again, what is the workflow that you want your users to have, right? If I know who you are, and if I've pre-registered my user, I can enable them to check out faster. I can enable them to move a little bit quicker because I'm not, giving them long forms to fill out and validating a lot of extra stuff, right? I kind of just have some of this stuff already pre-prepped and ready to go up front. Now, what happens when the user sends that payment? What happens to us? What do we do now? Now I have to think about, what does my backend workflow look like, right? Now, before I do that, I'm going to head back over to JetBrains Writer. But what I want to do here is I want to actually show you what some of this code looks like that I actually wrote to kind of wire this up together. And I want you to see that it's really not as intimidating as we often think things are. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to head over to the Solution Explorer. And the first thing I want to do is show you the identity server bits that I think are pretty interesting. So inside of identity server, so if you create a default identity server template, this one is using like I think it's called the in-memory template, and you can install their templates using like the .NET install command line. What I've created in here is a thing called a customer profile service, right? Now, the customer profile service is pretty much a thing that you could register inside of identity server, and it'll let it know, well, where is my user coming from, right? Who is this person? And so essentially all I've done is I have a custom data store. This is just a MongoDB thing. And then you can notice I'm going into my data store. I am getting my customer information. I'm creating the different claims, right? Because we're using claims. Claims are just our key value pairs that represent customer information. So my given name, my full name, my email name. But notice too, I'm also getting a custom claim for Stripe, right? For my Stripe customer ID. So that means that when I log in and I send this back to my application, I have the ID of the customer in Stripe, not in my database, but the ID that represents my payment processor. So I know when I'm making calls to check out, to get payment methods, to refund, to do any type of operations on behalf of the user, I know who that user is, right? And again, that's already associated with my identity server account. Excuse me. So I think another part I'll show you super quick. So folks will be like, oh, okay, well, how do you log in the user? So, and here's the thing. I love to be honest with people. So you see all these folders in here? I did not create these, right? This is just from the template. I'm just going to show you the part that I actually moved. Now, inside of accounts, and then there's login. Excuse me. I'm going to look at the model. Is this it? No, that's not what I want. Here we go. So inside of here, again, this was all pre-prepped for me. The only part that I did was different. If we take a look here, after the form is submitted, make sure the model is valid. All I did here was at the bottom. Where is it? 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 Is this the login one? Am I in the right one? Login. Where is it? Hold on, I'm going to find it. I know where it is. Post. I can't find it. Okay, here we go. Great, found it. So I get my user out of my data store, right? I've injected my data store in the thing. And then all I'm saying is customers not know. Now, don't do this, okay? I say don't do this because what you should be doing here is checking for a password. I'm not checking for a password because this is a demo, but really what you want to do is make sure that you're checking for passwords, you're checking credentials, you're going into whatever store that you have your users and making sure that things are great. Really, all I'm doing here is just saying, hey, give me the username and then send them back. Again, because I'm a lazy developer and I just wanted to show the demo, but don't do what I do what I tell you to do, right? Make sure you check for the actual things that go in here. But again, the important part I wanted to show you was there's really not a lot for you to extend identity server to create some of these custom data stores. Again, I created a profile data store. This is just using MongoDB, and it has, basic operations, as you can imagine, insert, create, update, delete kind of thing. And then all I do is inside of the login page, I just, I look for the user, I can validate their credentials, I send them back. But now in my main web application, I have the different things that I need from that user, right? I know their Stripe ID, I know their name and their email address. So now, as they're doing things in my app, I can start to really understand what exactly is happening here. So that's the front end, and that's how that part of it worked. Now, the other part I want to show you is back into our main application. I'm going to close some of these other files because when you have too many tabs open, it gets a little messy. When I head back over to my main application, I have this thing called I have my webhook handler, right? This is just an ASP.NET controller. You could have done it in minimal APIs. It really just doesn't matter. This is just an endpoint that is going to respond to webhooks, right? Now, why do I need something to respond to webhooks? Remember I told you, and this is the same thing if you're working with Twilio or SendGrid or anything else that sends webhooks, right? Essentially, I've given this service work to do, and now I need to be able to receive a successful message, a failed message. I need to know what happens, but I need to know what happens in a very deferred way. And so inside of here, what I've done is I'm going to listen to an event, and I want to know when my checkout session is completed. right? I want to know that, okay, this thing has been paid for. And this is the interesting part that we're doing. After it's been paid for, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a message into Azure Service Bus. Okay. I'm going to drop a message into Azure Service Bus, and now I'm going to back my user out, and I'm going to let that work process happen in the back. What's happening here is I'm kicking off a workflow, right? Like a real workflow. We're going to talk about that in a second, right? I'm kicking off a durable functions workflow that has different steps. And those steps are going to say, okay, now that we have a successful payment, what are the things that I need to do? What are these steps that we need to execute to make sure that things are happening in the right way, right? And so this is just one of the events. I actually have another event somewhere under here. Like this one also is a session expired event. Expired means that, hey, I added stuff and I never actually hit the submit button. Like I never said I actually wanted it, and things have just been like sitting in my cart for a long time. It eventually, what happens is that that session expires, right? And so I have another one here for expires as well. But pretty much what I want to say is, hey, when I get webhooks in, what I want to do is I want to respond quickly, and I want to defer that work to somewhere else. And as I'm deferring that work, it's going to kick off these different backend workflows. It's going to kick off these different steps that I'm going to run, and we're going to start processing that work in a deferred context, right? So it's not in my main application, and it kind of keeps my app light and responsive. And now we can rely on the power of the cloud to deal with some of that other types of stuff. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. I feel like that was a lot of talking on my point. So let me know if you have any questions about that. And if not, then we can move over and I can show you what like some of the pieces in Azure kind of look like.
Well, I have some questions. The first one, you talked about syncing data between your data store. In your case, you're using MongoDB. And then Stripe has its own data store of customers, right?
Yeah.
How do you decide how much data should be, synced between your personal database and Stripe's user database as well?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those. It depends. So it does
depend, right?
It sounds like a cop-out, but it really does depend, right? So,
is there like a bare minimum you think you'd recommend a lot of folks if they're thinking about syncing data, like first name, last name, that kind of thing?
So here's the thing: depending on the payment processor you're using, we're talking about Stripe, but again, this is kind of the same for all of them. At minimum, they're going to need to know information about the transaction, right? They're going to need to know who the person is, probably their billing address. If you're shipping stuff, they're going to need to know your shipping address, right? That, like, all that stuff is going to need to be in there. Maybe their phone number and email address, if that's a thing, if that's stuff that you're collecting. They're going to need to know what the product is or what they are, in case you're saying a lot of products. And then the different prices for those products. A lot of payment processors support like multiple currencies, right? So if I'm selling something that's in Mexico, something in Brazil, something in Australia, something in the United States, I'm going to show a different price for these different things, right? So I need to know, hey, if I'm selling to someone in Belgium, am I showing them the right currency, right? Is this for their locale? Like, is this the right thing for them to see, right? And so, based on that, like the source of truth, to an extent, at least when it comes to your products, well, it kind of depends, right? Like you can have it in your database, right? And maybe inside of your database, you might have things like the inventory, right? You might have like how many times this was bought. You want to do some certain types of reporting. But inside of your payment processor, at the minimum, it needs to know who the person is, their payment information, or what products they're buying, right? Okay. And so I've seen it both ways, I guess. I've seen it where folks have used their payment processor as a source of truth. And I've also seen it where like their main database is the source of truth. And then how much information goes back and forth is really dependent on them. For Stripe specifically, you can do it in a way that you never give us customer information and you just like check out, but we are going to create a customer, right? Because it has to be attached to somebody, right? And so even though it is not your customer or is not your, the profile of the person that you have in your database, we still have to attach it to a person. Like it was bought by somebody.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it was bought using some credit card information or some bank account information. If we have the bank account information, the payment information, we need to know who the person is, right? And so there needs to be some minimal record of whatever that is, you
Okay.
know, for a variety of reasons. But again, depending on whether that's a complete record or not is completely up to you.
Okay. Yeah, we have Stripe customers in chat. I'd love to hear from them in terms of like how they approached it. I guess the second question, since we're on webhooks,
Mhm.
you know, how does Stripe? How do you authenticate that Stripe is the entity sending you back that webhook request, right? So we have an endpoint. Stripe sends a request. What's the authentication process like to make sure that that's actually coming from Stripe?
Sure, we can talk about that. So if I head back over to my Stripe dashboard, right? So this is dashboard.stripe.com. On the developers section, on the webhooks, right? This is my machine. I'm connected to it right now. If I go to webhooks, let's say I do like, I don't know, add endpoint or something like that. Right? Oh my goodness, you're really gonna make me do this right now? As I go into my endpoint, what you'll see is it'll give you what's called a key, right? Here's your key. I'll show you this key because this is just like a test key, right? But you'll have a webhook key, right? And then in your webhook key, what you'll do is inside of your request handle, you can do some validation for that as well.
Okay.
That was a local listener. If I wanted to add a listener, that was like this is my local one. If I wanted to do one that was like, I don't know, maybe I'm using Azure Functions or a Lambda function or something like that, I could put it in there. But then I'll just get the key. And now inside of my actual application, I can head back over here really quick. And at the top of my function, right? So my payload comes in, and then here, this is actually a Stripe function, right? Event utility construct event. I give it the payload and this request header, right? If the request is coming back from Stripe, you should have this HTTP header inside of it. And then here I have, I'm getting this from configuration. I'll just compare the key to the signature, and then it'll do some hashing and other fun stuff just to validate that this is actually coming from Stripe and not like some random person.
Okay. Great. That's great to see that. That seems pretty straightforward. So, and I imagine all this comes in a Stripe SDK that you have installed as a NuGet package. So,
yeah, it's just stripe.net, right, is what the SDK is, and you can install it, and you'll get access to, at the time that you install, you'll get access to whatever the current version of our stuff is.
Okay, great. All right, back to you. I'll be quiet now.
No problem. Feel free. Anytime there's questions, if you want to pop in, go ahead and let me know.
Yep.
So where were we, right? Like, so I've checked out a couple of products, or I've checked out one product, and what I want to show you now is like how exactly I'm passing off that information. Now I'm going to actually show you my program.cs file. Why does this thing open so big? All right, inside of my program.cs file, I'm using the Azure Service Bus extension. I just have the Azure Clients SDK installed, and they actually come with some really nice dependency injection support now. If you haven't looked at those SDKs in a while, so I can just do add service bus, and it'll add a service bus client to my DI container, and now I'll just give it the connection string, and now inside of my code I could just go ahead and start sending stuff off. So inside of my actual Azure instance, which I'll show you in a second too, what I have is session expired, so I need to redo my session because I've been talking for too much. What I actually have inside of here is let me come out of this. I have a resource group that has a couple of resources in here. The most importantly is I have this Azure Service Bus namespace. And when I take a look at this namespace, what you'll notice is that I'll have a couple of topics in here. Now, Azure Service Bus, if you're not familiar, supports queues and topics. Queues are more point-to-point messaging. So I send a message to the queue and it goes to like one place. If you have topics can broadcast out to multiple people, right? Multiple instances, multiple things that are listening to it. So inside of here, right, I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom. I have two subscriptions, right? I have one, I'll zoom into that really quickly. I'll have one that says checkout complete paid and checkout session expired. Now, if you look at them and kind of turn your head sideways, you might be like, oh, okay, those look like those webhook events that you had inside of your webhook handler, right? What I've done, if you might remember, like I added properties to those messages when I was sending them out. So based on the property, I can filter them out, right? Here's a filter. This is called a correlation filter. And inside a correlation filter, I'm going to say, if the message that comes into the topic has these properties, I want you to come to this particular subscription, right? So this one, I want this to be checkout session completed, right? Like, so this is the event that I'm listening to on this particular one. If I come out of this and I go to the other one, you can notice I have a different filter, right? This one's going to say, I'll click on this one. This is also a correlation filter. Correlation filter just means it's just looking at key value pairs versus like doing something else. If I have these properties available on the message, then I want to make sure that you come to this one instead, right? So again, thinking about like, okay, here's how I'm going to use the cloud. And I want to be able to have different workflows kicked off based on different topics. And then this is how I can have like the same pipe, technically, right? Like the same topic is the same pipe, but then the messages that go into that pipe go to different places based on like the properties that's associated with it. Hopefully that makes sense and that wasn't like too crazy. Okay, so a couple of things need to happen on your local machine. Now on my machine, like I said, like I've gone ahead and I have the service bus stuff set up. I've had my Stripe stuff set up. Now I need to make sure that whenever events fire in Stripe in outer space, that it comes down to my machine. So what I've done is I've started the Stripe CLI. Obviously, if you're running in the cloud, like you don't need to do that. You could just point it, in that UI essentially. You could just put in your own thing. Because I wanted to come to my machine, I actually want to run the Stripe CLI, and I want to filter out for checkout session completed events. So that means that I want these events to come to my machine. So now I'm still running my app. I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to click through this a couple more times. And what I'm expecting to happen, right? And again, I'm so glad that this thing takes like 2 seconds to do. If not, like it would take forever for us to send these messages. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this like once or twice. And what I should see now is when I go back into Azure Service Bus, I should have a couple of these things, a couple of these messages that are just sitting in the queue and waiting for me to process. Right, let's head back over here. And I should probably refresh this. And there you go, right? I have 2 messages went because I clicked the button 2 times, right? Again, a couple of good reasons why you'd want to do something like this or have some type of message bus messaging system, something that you could pass out work to. I think about like the reliance or the reliability of my application. If my front-end web app crashes or falls down or whatever the case is, I still want to make sure that all of the orders that went out before are still going to be able to be processed, right? And so if anything happens to my app, I don't lose them because they're in memory. They're out in the cloud. They're out in some messaging system somewhere, and they're persistent so that now if, whenever the world turns back on, they'll be able to be processed, right? Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. So we saw how the messages go in, like how do the messages actually come out? And I'm going to speed through this a little bit. And what we have here inside of this app is I have a serverless worker, right? And this one's made with Azure Durable Functions. Now, folks aren't familiar with durable functions. Essentially, it's an extension to Azure Functions. And what it does is it allows you to have, again, persistent workflows, right? Now, what's the difference between a persistent workflow and all the stuff that we've kind of just been talking about before, right? What's the difference between a persistent workflow and you just having a set of steps that does stuff? When we think about persistent workflows, we think about as I'm going through one task after another, as I'm going through one operation after another, if for whatever reason something falls down in the middle, I don't want to lose my state. I don't want to lose where I was in line, right? I want to be able to just continue and go ahead and do the rest of the work, right? And that might happen for a lot of different reasons. It might happen because maybe your database was down, maybe your queuing provider was down, maybe the person that's doing your shipping, maybe that's down, right? All these different things that we want to think about. Now, if I run this, I haven't run this yet, but this essentially is how I'm listening, right? This is the trigger that's going to listen to the complete paid topic, right? Or the complete paid subscription on this topic, right? And so when I start this up, it's not running right now, but when I start this up, it's going to listen to Azure Service Bus and it's going to deserialize that type into this payload. And then most of this code is just logging, to be very honest with you, login exception handling. The most important part is here, right? This is the only part that's actually doing work out of the side of the exception handling stuff. This part is saying, hey, okay, go ahead and schedule that orchestration, right? And so the orchestration or the orchestrator is the function that, again, is in control of coordinating the steps, what comes first, what comes second, and how we're moving through the workflow. Another great thing that Azure Functions, Durable Functions does is that it does what's called checkpointing. And I'll show you what that kind of means in a second. It actually looks easier to talk about if we look at the actual function. I'm sorry if this code is like jumping around a lot. If it is, please tell me. I'll try and slow down. Now, this is an Azure function, durable function, right? You can notice it takes an orchestration trigger, right? So this is the orchestrator. And then inside of here, off of the context, I'm calling these different activities. These activities are just the different steps that you take inside of your operation, right? Now, for every time you see me call activity async, and there's some other methods on top of there you can call with like retries and some other things. But every time I call a function like this off of the context, it's creating a checkpoint, right? Once it returns. So I know, okay, well, this is the result of my workflow, right? This is where I am. This is what the response was from this particular step. Now, what happens if, I don't know, this particular process in the cloud crashes and it needs to spin up another one? What happens if, my Kubernetes container thing shuts down and I need to spin up more? Well, what happens is that, okay, when it spins up, it could look at the actual instance. It could look at the history, because again, I'm saving the state in like a history table. It could look at the history and it could say, okay, well, this is where I ended off the last time. I'll just continue from that point. So all of these steps that happened prior, I'm not going to run them again. I'm just going to run the stuff that hasn't run yet, right? And then I'm just going to take the state. I'm just going to take the results from these previous ones, and I'm just going to keep passing it along, right? So in this particular workflow, we have really only 4 functions. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's 4 functions inside of here. So I have send order confirmation. This one is actually using Twilio, and it's not, is it Twilio? This one's using Twilio to send out text messages. I have this one that is update inventory. There's this one, and again, there's this last one that's like sending a customer email out, right? So these are the steps that I want to take. Now, you might have other steps that you want to take as well. And in addition to the happy path steps, you also want to think about, well, what are your reconciliation steps? Like, what are your steps that are either going to say, hey, I have an error and I need to back up, or what are steps that are saying, hey, well, this is complete. We can like shut this thing down, right? Like we need to think about some of those types of things. Now, let's take a look at one of them. I think one of the interesting ones to look at would probably be scheduled delivery. So scheduled delivery inside of here, again, nothing too crazy is happening. Again, I'm getting a logger. Since I'm passing that Stripe user data around, like I have that Stripe session ID that I'm passing around, I'm going to use that to call a Stripe service. I'm like, hey, give me the session, that checkout session, right? And then off of that checkout session, I want to be able to get things like, I'm going to open this up a little bit. This is going to look a little crazy, but I want to be able to get things like the customer address, their phone number, their country code, and some of these types of things, right? And the reason I want to get that is that I'm passing this to a shipping service. This particular service that I'm using is called Shipyard. I think that's what it's called. Is it called Shipyard? Zip, zip, zip. It is called Ship Engine, not Shipyard. I apologize. If it is Ship Engine, people are here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you by the wrong name. But this thing is using a thing called Ship Engine. And Ship Engine is a really interesting service that what it allows you to do is I can request shipping information. Like here's the size and the weight of the package. Here's the destination it's going to. And you can make API calls to different providers like FedEx, UPS, DHL, et cetera, and then you can get pricing information back. This is how much I will charge you to send this thing to this place, right? They have a free developer sandboxing, so I've been kind of using that for a little bit. I also am not affiliated or I'm not endorsing Ship Engine, but again, I'm just telling you, I'm just using it for this demo because I think it's really cool. So again, off the Ship Engine thing, right? Like I create the required parameters, what's the size of the package? What did they buy from me? Where is it going? What's the customer name? Again, the information that you need to know about a transaction. And then I'm passing it into this create labels from shipments method, which comes from them. And then I'm just going to send that off. And then now this result should contain like the actual tracking number, right? And then I'm going to pass that tracking number back over to my durable function. And I think I have that. Where do I have it? It's in here somewhere. Oh, it's in the same file. I'm sorry. I'm going to pass that back to my durable function, right? And then after that, I'll just say, update customer. And when I update my customer, I'm going to be like, hey, your order's done. Here's the tracking code. And then hopefully you come to our event and you have a good time, right? Hopefully you come and you see all the great and wonderful things that are happening. So anyway, so that was a lot of stuff, but let's kind of take it from the top to bottom and kind of talk about like what exactly happened, right? In the beginning, like we kind of looked and talked about like what was the customer experience like, right? The customer workflow, but really talking about the customer experience. I want to come to this website. I want to be able to look at a thing that I want to buy, and I want to be able to check out as soon as I can. The fact of the matter is a lot of customers are lost because checking out is hard. The forms are too long. You know, I mean, have you ever gone to a website and, I don't know, had to fill out like, I don't know, 20 things just to say, here, take my money? Usually you're probably going to leave. It's taking too long and it's just not, it just doesn't feel good. I feel the same way whenever I fill out surveys and the surveys have like 5 pages of questions. I'm just like, I'm not going to fill this out anymore. Like you have me after the second page, like I'm done, right? Like you want to be able to have them go through that and deal with that really quickly. So that's their front end experience, right? Like that's their front end workflow. Then now when we think about ours as a developer and this is the company, okay, now we have their order, we have their money. What are the things that we need to do? What are the steps that we need to take, right? And then how do I make sure that that happens in a reliable way, right? I want to inform them, hey, well, you got your order, we're going to take care of you. We're going to go and make shipping calls. We're going to update our inventory. Then we're going to send out emails to say, okay, yeah, everything is good. You have your tickets. We're going to send them in the mail. But then here's also a tracking code in your email that you could use. And here's the provider that we use to send it to. And you could look and see whenever it's going to get to your house, right? So think about me as a customer. What does it look like from desktop to door, right? Like, what does it look like from me clicking on this website to me opening my door and seeing the thing in the mail or in front of my door? And what does it take for us to do that? So again, I'm gonna pause again. Let me know if that makes sense for folks. Hopefully this was useful. I wanted to try and show like more of a fuller demo. And there's some other things in there that we could talk about too. But if you're interested and you think this is something that was helpful for you, the code is up here on GitHub and you can always take a look at it.
Okay, cool. That was actually one of the questions. I was saving it till the end, but our friends in Nigeria asked, is this project open source? Here it is.
Yes.
Let me, Cecil, if you could copy and paste that into the chat, that would be super helpful. So,
sure, no problem.
Another thing I noticed that I wanted to ask, and folks, if you're in chat and you have questions, please feel free to ask them. Cecil's like he's the Santa of GitHub code today. So Merry Christmas in July. I don't know.
I want to say something.
Yeah.
So I'm a developer advocate, and I'm also an advocate that does not like designing UI. Why is that point important? When you come to this repo, I'm going to zoom in here for a second so folks can see. There are a lot of branches in here of this same demo using different things. The one that you want to look at today is the Azure branch, because again, it has Azure things in there. I have some bicep templates. I have, set up for like all these other things. So when you come here, what is this thing? What is it asking me? Anyway, when you come to this repo, why is this asking me this now?
Just confirm.
Okay. I'm like, of course, you got to do it when I'm streaming. When you come to this repo, make sure that you're looking on the correct branch. Because again, those other branches show similar patterns and what have you with like the same UI, but the backends are all different. So again, I just want to make sure folks look at the right branch.
Okay. I guess another question I had when you were going through the demo, you mentioned the Stripe CLI. Yes. And how it was like forwarding information from Stripe's backend services to your local host. Mm-hmm. So was it doing that, or was it running like an instance of those APIs locally? Like, what does the Stripe CLI give folks working with Stripe?
Sure, you get a lot with the CLI. One of the things that it does do is it creates a tunnel between Stripe in outer space and my machine here. And so whenever those events are fired, I can listen to all the events, but in this particular one, I can filter out and say, I only want to get these particular types of events. It'll just create a tunnel that'll go from from Stripe and outer space to like the endpoint that you pointed to. So here locally, you can see I'm pointing this to like localhost 4242/webhook, which is my local machine. But then the actual transactions and the actual work is still happening in Stripe in the cloud. Now you can do this. You can do this with something like ngrok, and we actually embed ngrok to an extent inside of our CLI. Our CLI is open source, so no secret. But essentially, that's really what happens, right? Like you're able to create that funnel from the top to the bottom. You could do other things with the CLI as well. Like you can actually call endpoints if you wanted to with the CLI. I could do stuff like, I don't know, Stripe checkout sessions list, right? And I could get a list of all my sessions that are in here. I could do forwarding. I could query accounts. I could create accounts. And if folks are interested, we actually have a Stripe samples endpoint, right? What the Stripe samples endpoint does is we have a bunch of samples that are on GitHub. And if you want to run samples locally, you can do Stripe samples create, and then just point it at a repo, and it'll pull it down with, obviously you gotta, set certain parameters like, I want this programming language, and I want this front end, I want this back end. Like you can set certain things, and it'll kind of bundle up a sample for you, and you can have it locally in your machine. So again, you can do a lot of cool things with the CLI.
Cool. Yep. And folks in the chat are already cloning your repo, so that's awesome. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of durable functions, you were talking about checkpointing, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you have any advice for folks who are thinking about checkpoints, and particularly about the concept of like item potency, right? And item potency, for folks who don't know what that means, is like being able to run the same command multiple times without having unintended side effects. So in our case, you don't want to charge your customer 20 times just because you're retrying, right? That would be bad. So do you have any advice for folks in terms of that topic?
Sure. I think a couple of things. So there's a couple of different places that you can actually create these types of workflows, right? I'm using Azure Durable Functions. Folks might have heard of Temporal. Temporal does this too, just in a more agnostic way. And then Dapper actually just released their workflow engine like in the last version, right? So a couple months ago. So there's a lot of different places that do this, but they all kind of work on a similar premise, right? They all kind of have like this event sourced replay type thing where, as let's say we're talking about .NET, like as I call these awaits, right, it's going to save some state into some database somewhere. Now, a couple of things to know about that is the way it saves its state is by serializing things into JSON, right? One of the things that I've run into that I didn't know, that I found out, was if you have types that can't serialize into JSON, you're going to get very weird results back, right? You're not going to get serialization exceptions and things of that nature, but you should look at it, right? Because sometimes you'll get some false results and it'll look a kind of way. So think about like what are the types that you're actually injecting and returning from your thing. I personally have this activity result. This is a thing that I created. This is not in the framework. This is just mine. I just created this because I wanted to. And this, it holds a state. This is a read-only record. It holds a state. It holds a result type, right? And the result just has, I'm going to pop this up. Yeah, just yes or no, true or false. Did it work or did it not work? Right? And then it holds an exception, right? And I created this because I know it's serializable, but then I also wanted to have a thing that represented what is the result of a function, right? What does that mean? So sure, I could return bulls, I could return objects or whatever the case is, but like what does it mean to be successfully completed and not successfully completed, right? Like if I pass back an object of whatever custom type, does null mean it was successfully completed or not? You know what I mean? Like if I pass back numbers, is 0 a valid invalid? You know what I mean? Like is zero a valid state, or does 0 just means that I don't have any, right? Like what does success and not success mean? Like, so again, as I'm building my functions, I like to think about what does it mean to be successful and not successful. And also too, you want to think about like what are the operations that you're putting in there? Like what steps am I actually taking? And then am I designing my steps in a way that I can back out of it? right? So like you said, like, hey, if an error happens when I don't know, when I check out or whatever the case is, do I have an exception handler, or do I have, folks usually call it like a compensating action or whatever the case is in workflow speak. Do I have an action that's going to be able to roll back, right? And this is where like your if else's would kind of come into play, right? So here I could kind of say, hey, if my result is a failure, do something else, right? Like compensate, right? Like I'm going to set a custom status. You know what I mean? And then now instead of durable functions, we could do things like I can restart it, like I can fix it, right? Like let's say that error goes to like your reporting system, or it goes to your incidents response system, whatever it is that your operation is doing. Whoever sees that says, okay, great, I see what's happening. I'm going to fix the state, whatever that means, turn on the database, fix the network situation, whatever. And then now I can restart my function, right? But again, remember, as when it restarts, it's going to just continue from the part that it failed at, right? And so these are just some of the things you want to think about, right? Like you want to think about what are the things that I'm returning. You want to think about what exactly those steps are and how do I break them down. And you also want to think about, it's great when things are good, but what happens when bad things happen and I have to pull back out, right? Like how do I reverse some of those things?
Well, I guess I have a related question for you in terms of workflows. For folks who are maybe just starting to get into workflows, durable functions, how should folks approach things like versioning? Business processes change, stakeholders change their mind, maybe they come up with new approaches into solving these problems. So, how do you approach evolving a workflow as business processes change?
Yeah, I mean that's another one of those, like, it depends, right? Here here's what I like to do, and this might be a little bit harder, and it also depends on like the system that you're using, because I'm sure, again, durable functions and some other thing might do it differently, right? But I think good generic advice would be, a lot of folks use like proxies in front of their systems, and so when you have these proxies, you could say, hey, send traffic to this system or send it to that system, but in the front, I'm using the same API, right? And usually what a good practice, or one of the good practices I can recommend for folks is, if you have something like sticky sessions turned on or something like that, like if you have existing customers, send them that way. But if I have new people coming in, send them the other way, send them to the new route. And then you can start to slowly phase it out, because you don't want to, let's say you dramatically change your workflow. You don't want to just switch over your old folks, because now when the state rehydrates, it might be in a position where I'm like, I don't know where to go now because the world looks different, right? So I think better let them finish, better, like, I guess, purge those out, right? Let them run to, they're done, but then slowly move people over to the other side. I think that's usually like a good generic practice. But I also tell you, like, look at your workflow engine. Again, this is durable functions and there's other ones. Look at your workflow engine and see how it handles versioning, right? And then you could think about, okay, well, maybe I'll just spin up new instances in the cloud or on my local machine or my local data center, whatever the case is. And then now I'll just, slowly phase those out, right? Like the strategy you take, again, is really dependent on the framework. But again, on a high level, I think you could very much do like a 75%, 20%, or all new users go to the promised land, right? Then we move them all to the right side. Well, the other folks finish out the work that they're doing. And then when that's finished and when there's no more requests going over there, we can just shut it off and do something else.
All right. Very cool. That's really good advice. So on that note, there's a lot of happy people in chat. There's a lot of conversation happening there. So thank you, everybody over there. Thank you, Cecil. This was a great talk. I definitely learned a lot of things, especially I've heard the phrase PCI bandied about a lot, especially in places I've worked in the past. But now I know it's called Payment Card Industry and Security Standards. So now I know that. So that's good. Also, learning about Ship Engine was kind of cool. So I'm definitely going to go check that out. I know a couple people in chat were talking about that as well. So on that note, let me kind of wind down here. folks, again, thank you for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. If you want to learn more about our products, this was a ReSharper sponsored webinar. So if you want to check out ReSharper, head to jetbrains.com/ReSharper. Follow the ReSharper account on Twitter. If you want to read some of our .NET content, some of the things that I write or some of my colleagues write, you can head over to blog.jetbrains.com/.net. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel at JetBrains TV. If you want to follow Cecil, he's Cecil Phillip on Twitter, and you have his GitHub account as well. Oh, yep, right there. So, Cecil, do you have anything you'd like to plug or kind of direct people to as we kind of wind down here?
No, not really. Like you said, like I'm on Twitter, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Carrier Pigeon, wherever. I'm always willing to interact and engage with folks wherever they are. If you have any questions about it, feel free to submit an issue on the GitHub repo. I'm also, I'm not too proud to accept PRs. You know what I mean? If you want to send me a PR and help me update those docs or the README, happy to take them. But no, other than that, like, I hope that this was valuable for folks. I hope, the concepts and everything made sense. And like Khaled said, if there's any questions you have, anything you want to know, leave a comment in the video, message me, and then I'll try and do my best to get back to you.
Yeah. And I just want to let people know, I think, Cecil, you might have submitted, but JetBrains.net Days is coming up this year. It's going to be on September 26th, but we have a open call for speakers right now. So we have a lot of speakers and a lot of sessions in. I've looked at them, and they're pretty great. So if you want to be amongst those people giving great talks to the community around diverse topics, I really recommend submitting. And it's a lot of fun. So please join us on that day. And on that note, this is the time where I ask for a favor because we provide these webinars. But please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this content or want to see more content in the future, give us a like, subscribe, and we'll keep doing this. And if you have any comments, good or bad, leave them down below. And on that note, I guess we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Cecil.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Bye, folks.